Thank you. So just a short, a bit of a change of plan because the presentations were so great, we didn't stop them. So we're going to go through a little Q&A now before breaking out into the different breakout rooms. So I think I'm going to start with one question, and if ever, oh, I can see there is already one here. So I guess maybe we can start with this question. Maybe Sigrid, do you want to unmute yourself since it's a small room? You can ask your question.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm from Germany, the Geo Research Center in Potsdam, and I'm a remote sensing scientist and have been in natural hazards research for more than 20 years. And of course, for many people working in natural hazards research, the latest floods in Germany have been a very, how to say, traumatic event. I'm not a hydrologist, not a flood scientist, but I'm asking this question because in this area, in the heavily flooded area, basically all the cell phone structures were destroyed and the people were really left isolated. There was no communication to the outside world, and they were sitting on their roofs for more than 24 hours in parks because it took that long that really finally the word spread what was happening. And some mayors of a little town, a woman, by the way, the most acting one, went to the ridge and finally was able to make cell phone contact. I mean, we are speaking about Germany here. And so that's why, as great as I think you are much further ahead than Germany, I must say, because we are not used to this kind of fatal crises anymore. And so that's why I'm wondering if this issue has been considered and to what extent, that how long does the cell phone connection last with certain catastrophes?
So yeah, thank you, Sigrid, for the questions. During a major disaster, most of the infrastructure is destroyed, and we experienced that over time during the tsunami of Aceh and the grand liquefaction in Palu and others. We cannot communicate with people. So, and all communication media can be cut off, and that's we know about this, and so this application may not be used during that event. But the idea of this application is that we are giving people the knowledge before the disaster happened. So at least when people experienced like the major hazards, they have already been informed by the information, the continuous stream that we are giving to the people. So that is why we put into our follow point that the most important point is that this application must be used not only during the main disaster. So that is why, so in my presentation, the key, one of the key elements that we have to work, and we have to continue giving people the information is before the big disaster happened. Because when you when every time the disaster happened, only one mean of communication that might work, it's either the radio communication. So normally we have that radio communication already established. There is an organization in Indonesia that that prepared this radio communication for the public. So every time you don't have like internet connections, or even if you cannot make a call phone, you have this radio, and that radio is not prepared during the event, but prior to the event. So we have to think that this kind of information should strengthen people before the main event happens. Of course, that people need some information, but there are limitations that when like the big earthquake happens, we can do nothing to give people more information. So that is my answer. Can discuss more.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting. And I think coming from the research institute, which helped setting up a tsunami early warning system, I think we can now vice versa start learning from Indonesia for our disasters, because things like that radio communication, that all didn't work because it was not practiced and people were caught on surprise. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sigrid. Someone else has a question for our panelists? Okay, so
hi, Lorianne. Can I just
yes.
add to Debbie's example? So in the Philippines, after a disaster happens, and we get all of them, typhoons, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, social media will be filled with posts about people who are stuck in rooftops, who need help. But sometimes it's not the people themselves who are stuck in rooftops doing the posts. It's their friends or relatives. So I think that it's also important to have this ethos of care as disasters are going on, because we're a country that has survived disasters because of the social connections as well.
Thanks a lot, Pamela. So that kind of really leads me to the question I had, which is great. How do you...
Nico also has his hand up. I don't know. Is that for
Nico? Yeah.
to contribute to the previous answer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It is, and a very short one. Sorry. So I would echo that and learn from some of the recent experience we had in New Zealand around flooding and on the West Coast, where we had heaps of people without being evacuated because of the floods, and nobody was killed, fortunately, but a lot of people were left homeless effectively. And very often the message that we put out in times of disasters is targeted towards people who might need the assistance. But the problem is that sometimes people who need the assistance are not necessarily in a position to understand the message we're putting out. So I'm thinking people with disabilities, especially mental disabilities. And it's incredibly difficult to reach people like this directly. So instead, another way to look at it, which goes on to what Pamela was talking about, is actually issue some messaging, which is around what we call the whānau in New Zealand, which is the extended family, is the support network, targeting the messages to the support network. Have you look at your neighbors? Have you look at the old people, the elderlies, the people in need around your neighborhood? Is there anything that those guys might need from you? So it's encouraging people who need the help, but also people who might be able to provide the help in the community. So great point, Pamela.
Great. Okay. So actually, I'm seeing that now that time is ticking. So is there any other questions from the audience before we break out into the different rooms?
I would have one question to Pamela. Thank you very much for this detailed insight in how society works in the Philippines. And what of course struck me was this huge male dominance. And honestly, I mean, it's not so far away from Germany, because also in Germany, in these local disaster decision-making teams on the local level, all the mayor and responsible people were men, and there was only one woman. And this woman has been now, in the aftermath, being the most, I think, intelligent, outspoken, and also uniting voice. And she was very much affected by the fact that she couldn't do anything because she had to wait for the decision of, sorry to say, it's not against male, but we have this problem, the purely male dominated circles who were trying to defend their position. It's very, very similar. And so I was really struck by that. And I'm wondering, my question is, you said 300 years of Catholicism, but what was there before? In the Philippines, what is the native, how to say, family structure and culture? Does it make sense to look at these roots and to revitalize them? Because I could imagine that women had a stronger say before Catholicism moved in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, religion-wise, there was animism in Islam before Catholicism, and definitely, if you're talking about sustainability and long-term prevention of disasters, then so much of animism, ascribing personhood to the mountains and the rivers so that you can care for them because they take care of you. I mean, there's so much that we can adopt from that in the modern world. And before that, we don't have gendered pronouns in the Philippines. Even in our local language now, we just have siya, which can be male, female, or everything in between. So yeah, so that was one of the consequences of colonialism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Is there any other question? Otherwise, what we can do now is to break out for about half an hour, I think. So maybe 20 minutes, and then we can report back. So the idea is that we're going to break out in two rooms. One room is going to talk about communicating with public. The other one is going to talk about policymakers. And the first theme for this first breakout room session is to talk about challenges and opportunities. So basically, we're going to break out into these two rooms, discuss on our own about what are the challenges and opportunities for when communicating with different audiences. So the breakout rooms, you can actually, if you open your breakout room button at the bottom of your screen, you can see you should probably see your name, and you should see two breakout rooms. So I encourage you to join the one that you want to contribute to. do we let Nico, do we let Nico speak and then we report back? Yes.
Yeah. I think we do that, and maybe potentially after that we could stay as a group, because we're quite a small number.
Yeah.
And I think it might be quite interesting to draw in a range of perspectives across the group, and we're probably talking about quite similar things as well. So maybe we stay together for the last breakout. But yeah, let's let Nico speak.
I'm not sure it's for the best, but I think just to actually add on to what Debbie was talking about, and maybe talking something specific about social media, is that it's an incredibly easy way to actually to look at metrics. So we've got metrics associated with social media. And I think, Debbie, you showed some of them on the website in your presentations. And the great thing about social media is that we can actually keep an eye on the metrics. Are we actually communicating? How many people are we reaching, et cetera, et cetera? And I think one of the challenges in many ways is to extend that to other types of communication. How do we know we are reaching the other audiences that may not be reached by the social media? So elderlies come to mind. And this is, so I'll take a very practical example. For instance, when we had some floods recently in New Zealand, one of the key things we realized is that a part of the population just didn't do social media. People, the elderlies, etc. And the only thing they wanted was to talk to a human being. And they had one way to do that, which was to go to a community center to do that. And we set up a community center for that. But sometimes they just couldn't move. So the only thing they could do was pick up the phone and call, and they wanted to have a human to talk to. And so we set up basically a 0800 number so that people can do that. And with the same thing is whenever we talk about communication, whenever we talk about ways of reaching people, I think thinking immediately about ways of capturing metrics. How many calls did we get? How many people are we seeing, etc., is super important to see whether or not we're reaching the goals there. So it's just an extension of the social media, perhaps.
Yeah, well, that's
great. So I guess maybe we can report just a little bit about what we've discussed, and probably this has links to your room, Amy. So we highlighted a few challenges which are actually quite common with communicating science, mostly related to how to convey probabilities and uncertainties. That's already something like scientists struggle with to start with. So how do we convey that very clearly? So I guess there were a few, so that's one challenge, and then we turned it into an opportunity. So then let's use analogies more. So I think Nico had a good example about that. And there was something related to, let's make it easy for people. Like most of the time they want to know what they should do. So I think Davey had a good point also about that. Like they usually don't really, even if science they're interested in, sometimes not, we should really give them what they want to know. So make it easy for them so they can act upon this information. There was this theme that we discussed was about science not being a priority. And I think Pamela had some comments on this as well, because she works with women. And women have a lot of other priorities. So how do we make it more like a priority? Davey had a good example about disasters where basically they download the app when the disaster has happened. So basically, it's always like when the disaster happens, then you become interested. But how do we make it so that people get interested in the first place? So there was this very short discussion we had about like how do we move from one-way communication to two-way, so make most like an engagement, so then people really get something out of it as well. So we don't just tell them what we want to say, we really listen to what they want to know, and then maybe it can become a priority if they feel can be useful to them. I think that's something I got from this session. If somebody wants to comment on this, if I missed anything, maybe Jati, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think related to the key opportunities. So maybe Devi also Nico already explained about the powerful of the social media. So, and then by using the social media, it will be the the way how to communicate from the scientific point of view with the common people point of view related to the disaster here. So that's why. So that is very interesting that especially from many cases the social media is the maybe the social media is the most effective way to socialize and to disseminate some information related to the disaster and so on. I think that's all from my highlights to the some key opportunities related to the how to communicate with the public. Okay, Lauren, that's all.
Amy, do you want to continue?
Yeah. So we had an interesting discussion, partly continuing the kind of the contrast between the preparedness of Western European countries and the preparedness of places like Indonesia and the Philippines, which seem to be in many ways a long way ahead. And we talked about the kind of the challenges of getting populations that are very dependent on technology and governments that are very dependent on technology when that technology fails, to kind of sort of learn from experiences in the global south. So we had a group that was kind of it was quite small, a couple of us from Western Europe, and then a group from the Philippines as well, who were explaining to us about how the Philippines government in recent years has started working with organizations to prepare for hazards and to engage people through the schools and through education programs. The other thing that we talked about was opportunities for academics to get involved in giving policy advice, which is a kind of perennial challenge, I think, for people who do not work in the nodal agency, so don't work in the Volcano Observatory or the Met Office, that are officially responsible for this kind of thing. People who don't work in those institutions, how did they get involved? Should they get involved? How should they get involved? Which is a very complicated question. And in the UK, until we had a government that's corrupt, we at least had the SAGE system used to be quite good, with a list of experts in lots of different fields the government could reach out to. That has not worked very effectively at all during COVID for lots of reasons, mostly related to who is currently in power. So there is a lot of dependence on the political level as well for this kind of thing. We talked a bit about the importance of schools for kind of getting messages across. And we also have a couple of comments that we didn't get on to discussing around the kind of science hesitancy and so on again, which I think is an interesting question that maybe we could discuss as we move on into the next part of the breakouts. So we did also touch on communicating with the public, as well as some stuff around how to engage with policy. I would be really interested if anybody, say Nico and Devi, who work for nodal agencies, have perspectives on that question of are academics just in the way, or how should we get involved or not in advice and in contexts like that? Because I know it's an active discussion in the volcano community, for example.
So I can probably get the ball rolling on that. I think the answer is a resounding yes, in a coordinated fashion, and that's probably the best way I could put it. So to give maybe a practical example, we have and actually that's a discussion we'll have tomorrow at one of our national meetings. We've got a national volcano science advisory panel that basically encompasses people from monitoring agency, from GMS, but also people from all universities. And one of the key things we're trying to work out is how we actually operate together in times of crisis, for instance. And one of the key tasks that this group has is actually to come up with a consistent message that anyone can then convey. So typically I don't think that having a single point of source, single point of information as a single source of truth is necessarily possible anymore. It used to be possible when we didn't have social media, when we didn't have the internet, etc. But nowadays it's incredibly difficult. Perhaps instead, something that is more powerful is to have the same message, but conveyed by the range of sources, whether it's academics in universities, whether it's agencies that may give it different flavor, but the same consistent message coming from different agencies would certainly have more power than just a single source of truth, in my opinion. So long story short, absolutely, there is a role for everyone, so far as it's coordinated.
Okay, Pamela, please. Yeah.
Just building on the suggestions and how academics can be involved in policy, like at the University of the Philippines School of Urban and Regional Planning and School of Public Governance has short-term courses for disaster management specific to government officials. There may be 1 month to 3 months long. And the good thing is after these public servants become their students and then go back to their different towns and cities, then there's potential for further engagement on a policy level for specific municipalities.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, that's really interesting. We have a few things in the chat that we should maybe come to as well. So Nico has answered some of the questions. I think the one that's not been answered from Sigrid is reaching the elderly also a problem in Asian countries, so in non-Western contexts, or are there lots of multi-generational interactions, which I think is another important question, the sort of role of that social fabric and social networks in increasing resilience and so on. Pamela, did you want to comment on that for the Philippines? So that's Sigrid's question about reaching the elderly. Is it easier to reach the elderly in the Philippines, or is that still a problem?
I mean, it's easy to reach the elderly through like people live in extended families and elderlies are part of them. So it's easy in that sense. But then if you look at like inclusion in disaster initiatives on a large scale level, I think in terms of like policy specific to the elderly, then that's a bit more of a challenge. But if you're looking at everyday life, then they're included, they're prioritized in terms of the health and well-being of their families. I do think the multi-generation interactions, there's something in the chat here, are also important. What we're seeing is, the elderly have this deep knowledge about how nature works, that isn't necessarily communicated to the younger generations. And it seems like, at least in the communities that I work in, the science literacy is kind of one way coming from the youth, learning about scientific concepts related to disaster in their schools, and then transmitting that information to parents, but not necessarily the other way around.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Bruce that a lot of the same themes come up in communications and education, but are we making any actual progress rather than just the use of new tech is the progress? I don't know if any of the panelists want to come in on that. I think it's more complicated. I think that the fact that the social and the socio-technological is evolving so rapidly means that the same problem or the same question arises in lots of different guises, and technology interferes in the social quite a lot. So people interact with their phones and social media and so on in a different way to the way that they might have interacted in newspapers or whatever in the past. And so that does raise other questions. I think the other issue with it is hugely geographically specific as well. Both how people interact with things, but also the nature of the social fabric in places is so different. Like we've just been talking about community fabrics and cohesion and things like that, that really does make a big difference in terms of how communications work, and education or engagement it varies a lot in different places depending on the level of trust in the government and in government institutions and all of those kinds of things as well. So I think it's quite hard to crystallize the nature of progress globally in a kind of context like this, because it is so specific to different contexts and often to hazards as well, to groups of hazards, I think. But I don't know, do any of the panelists have perspectives on that?
I'll jump in just for a quick note here. I think the challenge has shifted from not having enough information to having too much information. And that's really where one of the issues lie, in my opinion, is how do we make the best use of the available information? How do we select information? How do we help people selecting information rather than us providing information? And I think that does require a bit of a mind shift from scientists and from all of us, which is about helping you to find the right information rather than us telling you things you don't know, because you can probably find that information anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something that we're really bad at teaching, I think. The sort of critical thinking of, is this source actually credible, kinds of, where do I get information that I can trust versus where do I get information that's completely off the charts? Yeah, that's a fantastic point, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments on that?
I think there is also a question from Bruce here in chat. So should we be selecting information that the public sees or rather provide a better GUI? Yeah, maybe using the figures like that and make sure they have access to everything. Yeah. So maybe from a panelist, yeah, can have any comment? Graphical user interface, yeah. Maybe, Pak Devi, you have maybe experience, yeah, about the.
Yeah, I think I think we have discussed this that first about selecting information. I think we what we did what we do at CDGHM is that certainly we make a filter, so we don't put all of the information to the public, and so we have like a limited data that are not accessible for public, and we have this, you know, this is how we want to it's not to stop people to get the information, but we want to direct people only to receive this information, not everything. And a better GUI or UI, maybe it is also important. So both are important. UI and UX, we learned that this is important, and we have like some input from the public as well, and both are important. So if you see an ugly page, I think you will not read everything, but if you see something that is really that is really interesting for you, then you might read all the contents. So I think that's also important, and I think it is not a subjective thing. It is I think universal. Everyone likes things that are handy and that are interesting. So that's my my response to that.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful as well. And I think the big challenge with a lot of this is that we don't get to curate what people see apart from our own feeds. And so the things that you follow on Facebook will depend on, you know, your own views and the people you know, and the things that Facebook decides will randomly appear in your feed. And so you kind of create a little echo chamber of the things that you are interested in, and like-minded people and so on. And so you might end up seeing things that are really not very helpful and not very accurate, unless you follow the nodal agency for NatHazards or whatever it is, on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, or all of these things, if you do all of these things. And that's part of the challenge, I think, is getting the message out to people that they do need to follow the agencies that are putting out the official kinds of information. But that also involves trust in those agencies and trust in the government that listens to them. So there are really quite complicated socio-political problems, I think, or challenges rather.
If I can comment quickly, Amy, on something that I think a lot of scientists are doing and that I feel are really good, and we're doing it as well here at the Earth Observatory, is, okay, in Singapore, we have no volcano, we have no earthquakes, but sometimes we do comment, you know, on activity about these volcanoes, and we always refer to the source of authority. So in that case, Magma Indonesia or CVGHM or FIVOX in the Philippines. So we always make sure that in our comments, at the end, there is always, we direct the reader to the trusted source of information. If ever we comment on, okay, CVGHM raised the alert level from 2 to 3, that's just a comment from us, we're not involved, but follow CVGHM for official updates. I've seen recently for La Palma eruption, a lot of people are pointing at InVolcan, follow these people, follow these people. So I think as a scientist, we comment on everything and anything, but if we do our due diligence, I think it's a good practice to always refer to the right authoritative agency. At least that's what we're trying to do here.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've covered most of the stuff in the chat now. We've also talked a bit about some of this stuff that's come up on the policy Padlet. And so, yeah, one of the things the other thing that was raised on the policy Padlet was the science hesitancy, kind of the sort of thing that's reflected in the vaccine hesitancy and the sort of misinformation about COVID vaccines and things like that has happened. And I think it is an interesting and challenging problem of combating misinformation. Does anybody have experience of or an example of that? I think Debbie mentioned a number of things briefly in his talk. And I wondered, Debbie, maybe you could say a little bit more about some of the sort of the hoaxes that you mentioned and how you dealt with those.
Yeah, I think hoaxes will always be there. I think there's never a crisis in Indonesia without hoaxes. So I think people try to, that's also some people try to promote themselves to get more followers, and if there is it said that if you bad news is good news. So for them, it's like when you put some exaggerated title, then it might attract people more than if you say something normal. So and that is what we have faced from time to time. But we think that the social media are quite helpful for that, but not always. So, for example, I think in the beginning of this year, we have a hoax that was spread in an island. It's quite a remote island in east of Indonesia, and so there was a volcano erupting, and there was a hoax that said that there will be a big earthquake following this eruption, and then there will be a tsunami, and so people will be affected people on the coast will be affected. And so there were a massive evacuations, and we put everything in the social media that was hoax, but yeah, they did the evacuation, and there were 2 people died during this incident, and so no earthquakes, no tsunami, but still 2 people died. So hoax is like something that we might, maybe in the big city you said that, okay, that's a hoax, but it can cost lives as well. So that is why we tried with any methods. So we know that, as I showed you in my presentation, that Magma is only one media that we try to develop. It's not the only. So we try to give different audiences a different approach. So some elderly, for example, they are more comfortable if we come to them and give the explanation directly. So we did that as well. We do that as well. And some people who cannot access Magma because of internet problems, but if they still have like networks for SMS, so we also developed the SMS blast system for people who cannot access Magma. So there is no single solution that we, in our experience, when you face the crisis, you do anything you can with any media to give, to inform, to communicate with people. So that's also my response to a question that we make progress in communication. Certainly we do, we make a lot of progress, but of course it's not perfect. But now people know what is pyroclastic flow, what is something like people in the past don't understand that. And about the limitation, I would also like to share about why we filter data. It's not like it's a secret. It's not something like that. It's more that if we share that, people will get confused. So something that is not in public domain, we can still you can still get the data by asking the institution. So for example, we don't we gave API for scientists who want to use the data from Magma, and we provide that, and we already do that since many years. So the aviation sectors, they got the fauna directly to their system, and now we also launch a new program. It's called a GeoShare. So it's a new program again this year. It's specifically for university and also for the local government. So they can now enter into the Magma system so that they can work together with us. So we give portion for other stakeholders so that we can work together. Because we know that we are not a lot of people, even we have like 260 people, staff, but we have 127 volcanoes, so we still need other people to work together with us. Sorry, there is another question. I think the number of folks, I couldn't answer if it's increasing or not, but it's always appeared in any crisis. I haven't analyzed if it's increasing or not. But in different crises, sometimes it's always the same hoax. So like people posting another volcanoes that to describe the condition of another volcanoes. So for example, like the eruption of the image of Sinabung eruptions, then when there was a crisis at another volcano, they post that, okay, the pyroclastic flow has has already destroyed the settlements, and so people use that, and people gain followers by doing that. I saw something, a headline like NASA will find that if Agung erupted, the world will cool, will make the world cooler, like something like that, and people love that kind of exaggerated title. So yeah.
Nico, you had your hand up, right?
I did, and it was just a reflection on what. My apologies for the cat going through. It was a general comment on social media. One of the great things of social media is that, and it relates to one of the comments I think that Sigrid made in the chat around trust and building trust. I think once you reach that level of trust, you can actually use social media to have some form of self-moderations. And that's what I really like about it, is that you as an organization are not necessarily the one having to correct things being said and hoaxes. You start to have actually people doing that for you. And that's really when you start to actually really build on the reputation, on the trust, to actually really create a community of science, maybe, or of message. And that's really something that we were worried about initially, about using social media and having to, how many fires can you try to attend on social media? How many hoaxes are you trying to attend? But the reality is that there are very few that you often have to, because if you build that trust, you've got the rest of the community is doing it for you.
Yeah, that's a great point too. So we just have a few minutes left of this session now before we are invited to view the display material for all of the themes together, which are all on a Padlet, and I'll put the link to that in the chat in a minute. There is also a breakout room to discuss the display material, which may or may not have the people presenting the material available to discuss. Or you could just have a little bit of a break before the final plenary session, which is between all three of the themes from today. So yeah, Alex has really helpfully put the breakout link and also the Padlet with all the posters on it. And there's some really great posters there, so do go and have a look. There's another poster about mobile phones. I think just go to the, so yeah, we have a couple on the role of big data on social response, in understanding social response, and then mobile phone technologies from the SHEAR program as well. And you can see the Padlet has all of the display material from all of the different themes throughout the whole conference. So do go and have a look at that. And then we will be back in the main plenary in about half an hour, just over half an hour, which again will feature Nico again. Thank you, Nico, for being part of that discussion. And there will be a panelist from each of the three themes this morning, evening, or afternoon, depending upon where you are. And the link for the main session after, so in exactly 35 minutes time, wherever you are, is that one in the chat. But do please have a look at the display material, because there's some really good stuff, and if you want to discuss it, there's a breakout room for that as well. Thank you so much for all of your contributions. It's been a really great, interesting session, and I've learned a lot. So really, really appreciate everybody's involvement and engagement. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you.
It was actually too short. We were worried about having sessions a bit too long, but way too short, actually.
Yeah.
There's so much
Yeah.
we could discuss. So there's a lot of-
Okay. We meet half an hour, yeah, after this.
Yeah, the plenary is in.
Yeah, the plenary. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we should take a break.